The Inn of Lost Hours. There exists, between the folds of hills no cartographer has ever charted and along a road that never appears the same twice to those who walk it, a town whose name cannot be pronounced aloud without a softening of the heart and a slight narrowing of the eyes, as though memory itself leaned forward to listen. This town, which resembles in part the curve of a half-forgotten melody and in part the scent of bread baking on a rainy afternoon, holds no distinction upon the maps of the world, for it was never meant to be found by those who search with their eyes alone. It exists like a sigh on the wind, or the hush of a page turning in a book that has waited too long to be read, and its streets, paved in cobblestones the color of faded ink, wind in patterns that no architect could trace, for they are drawn by the whims of time, not of man. In this town stands a building that does not declare itself with signs nor chimneys nor glassy windows meant to reflect the sun, but rather nestles into the landscape with the humble poise of something that has always been there, older than questions and more silent than answers. It is called, by those who know to call it anything at all, the Inn of Lost Hours, and it breathes with the same slow, measured cadence as an elderly cat asleep by a hearth. Its walls are thick with the weight of stories, layered like the dust upon its bookshelves, and its beams, of dark and aromatic wood, stretch across the ceilings with the patient strength of arms that have held sorrow and joy alike without ever breaking. It was on an evening neither too warm nor too cold, a twilight tinged with the same ambivalent melancholy of a letter found in an old coat pocket, that the protagonist of this story arrived. Not with fanfare, not with the sound of horses' hooves nor the puff of steam from a weary engine, but with the quiet inevitability of someone who has long since stopped resisting the current and has chosen instead to let it carry them wherever it may. His name, though it mattered less in that place than the shape of his silences or the way his hands trembled when brushing against memory, was Emiliano Valori, and he had reached that ambiguous season in a man's life when the freshness of dreams has begun to sour into the musky perfume of regret. Emiliano was not, in the ordinary sense, remarkable, though perhaps the word ordinary had never truly applied to him, for his days had been lived with the absent-minded precision of someone always slightly elsewhere, his steps following the path of thoughts too intricate to share aloud. He had been a restorer of old clocks, a profession that suited his temperament well, for it demanded a quiet patience and a sensitivity to mechanisms both seen and unseen. He spent his life in the company of gears and escapements, of pendulums and balance wheels, all whispering their secrets in the rhythmic language of time. His hands, now worn with the soft abrasions of countless minutes coaxed back into being, had learned to hear the smallest irregularities in tick and talk, and he could tell you, with alarming precision, not just what was broken, but what had been ignored. Yet it was not for broken clocks that Emiliano had set out from the gray city in which he had spent so many unnoticed years, nor for repair that he had wrapped his thin scarf about his neck and followed a road that seemed always to lead away from where it began. Rather, it was an absence, hollow and echoing like a room stripped of furniture, that had compelled his wandering, an ache for something he could not name but which haunted him with the familiarity of a face glimpsed in a dream, beloved, yes, but indistinct. He had no destination in mind when he left, nor company, nor plan, only a sensation, vague and persistent, that something once his had slipped between the cracks of his life like a dropped coin rolling beneath a dresser, and that perhaps, if he walked long enough, he might find it again. The road that led him there, like the town itself, obeyed no logic known to maps. It passed through orchards where the trees whispered in forgotten dialects, over bridges that groaned with the memories of lovers and exiles, and alongside rivers that ran backwards in places, as though time itself had sighed and given up the effort of keeping order. Emiliano walked without haste, for he had long since stopped measuring life in hours and had taken instead to counting the changes in the color of the sky or the smell of moss after rain. He slept where he could, beneath canopies of leaves or inside abandoned chapels whose stained-glass windows still remembered the light of prayers, and he ate sparingly, never truly hungry but always hollow, like a bell that has not been rung. It was at the end of such a wandering day that he found himself at the threshold of the inn. He did not see it at first, for it stood shyly behind a veil of ivy and a hedge of forget-me-nots that seemed too vibrant for the season, but he felt it, that peculiar stillness that descends upon the soul when it draws near a place meant to receive it. There was no sign, only a wooden door the color of aged parchment and a brass handle shaped like a key turned inward, but he knew, without doubt, that he was expected. His hand did not hesitate. The door opened with the soft sigh of a book closing on the final page, and the scent that greeted him was not of dust nor smoke nor vinegar polish, but of time itself, warm, worn, fragrant with the breath of memory. Inside, the inn was neither large nor small, neither opulent nor sparse. It was simply right, in the way a glove is right when it remembers the curve of your fingers, or a melody when it fits perfectly into the pause between thoughts. A fire flickered in the hearth, not roaring, but persistent, and chairs, none quite matching, gathered around it like old friends sharing secrets. The floor creaked gently beneath his feet, not in protest, but in welcome, and from somewhere deeper in the house came the scent of something baking, though whether it was cake or bread or something more elusive, he could not be sure. Lamps glowed with the golden light of nostalgia, casting long shadows that whispered of yesterdays left unspoken. A figure emerged from behind the counter, not so much walking as appearing, like a thought that had taken form. She was neither young nor old, neither beautiful nor plain, but possessed of that rare and solemn grace found in librarians of enchanted libraries or seamstresses who remember your dreams. Her hair, the color of stormlit wheat, was bound in a loose twist that suggested both care and indifference, and her eyes, pale as moon water, regarded Emiliano with the quiet interest of someone who had been waiting not for a person, but for the moment in which a person would arrive. "Welcome," she said, and her voice held within it the rustle of pages and the hush of snowfall. "Your room is ready." Emiliano, who had not announced himself, who had not asked for shelter nor claimed a reservation, found himself nodding, not because he understood, but because he did not need to. There was, in that place, a suspension of the need for explanation, as though the laws of reason had been gently set aside in favor of something older, more generous, and infinitely more forgiving. He was led through a corridor lined with mirrors that did not reflect the present but fragments of the past, a bicycle with a red ribbon, a dog waiting by a gate, a pair of hands threading a button. Each mirror whispered a different hour, lost or forgotten, and Emiliano passed them with reverence, not daring to look too closely, as one might pass gravestones bearing familiar names. The room he was given was simple: wooden floors, a bed that smelled faintly of lavender, a desk with a single drawer, but upon the pillow lay a note, written in a hand he did not know but recognized all the same. "Tonight, you will remember." There was no signature. He slept that first night as one only sleeps in a place that has been waiting for them. Deeply, undisturbed, and full of dreams shaped like smoke, curling and uncurling with the hush of distant waves. The inn did not impose itself upon his thoughts, nor did its other guests, if indeed there were any, make themselves known. It was as though the place itself wished to remain in the periphery of his awareness until he was ready to see it fully, and Emiliano, long practiced in the art of listening to the silence between ticks, obliged. The days that followed were filled with a stillness that was not emptiness, but potential. He wandered the town, whose streets twisted like the script of forgotten poets and whose shops opened only when needed, a tea seller who brewed elixirs for memories not yet made, a bookbinder who mended diaries never written, a painter who captured the dreams of those who had not yet dreamed them. The people spoke little, but their eyes held volumes, and their smiles contained whole chapters of kindness. In the square stood a clock tower that never struck the hour, its hands forever paused at the moment before twilight, neither day nor night, but the soft hush between them. Emiliano did not question. He observed. He waited. And in the corners of his thoughts, something stirred, a thread unspooling, a door creaking open, a name rising from the depths of sleep. And always, always, the inn awaited his return, its windows glowing with the warmth of candles lit not to banish the dark, but to honor it, to soften it, to remind it of gentler times. For there, in that quiet, unspoken place, time was not lost. It was waiting. It was on the fourth morning, or what might have been the fourth, if indeed mornings in that town followed the same unyielding logic as elsewhere in the world, which, Emiliano had already begun to suspect, they did not. That something within him, perhaps no more than a flicker of impatience or the gentle prod of a long-slumbering question, urged him to ask, not aloud, but inwardly, as though posing the query to the walls themselves, "What is this place?" And the answer, though it did not come in words, arrived nonetheless, as some truths do, not carried on the wings of reason, but breathed into the room like the scent of a forgotten season. For when Emiliano descended the staircase that morning, the one that seemed longer than he remembered and which curved in ways that suggested the house itself was listening, he found the innkeeper waiting at the base, not behind the counter this time, but standing beside a door he had not noticed before, a narrow and unadorned thing tucked between two bookcases, its wood dark as burnt sugar and worn smooth by many hands, though none had passed through it during his stay, at least not that he had seen. "Would you care for tea?" the innkeeper asked, and though the question was simple, the tone in which it was spoken made it feel like an invitation to something deeper than mere refreshment. "Yes," he replied, and though he did not know what he was agreeing to, he understood, somewhere beneath his thoughts, that the act of agreeing was the first true step he had taken since his arrival, not a step of the body, but of the self. She led him not to the common room, where he had taken breakfast on the previous days, always served warm, always accompanied by the distant chime of bells, but through the narrow door, which opened with a sigh like silk falling, and into a room that was both utterly unfamiliar and intimately known, like a memory too long suppressed. It was circular, this room, its walls lined not with books, as he had half expected, but with clocks, all manner of them. Tall grandfather clocks with mahogany faces and brass pendulums, cuckoo clocks carved with birds whose beaks seemed on the verge of speech, delicate carriage clocks in glass cases, sand timers and sundials, pocket watches suspended from invisible threads, and even a few that did not seem to tell time at all, but something stranger and far more elusive, measured not in hours or seconds, but in sighs, in pauses, in glances shared and words left unsaid. At the center of the room stood a round table, set for two, with a porcelain teapot steaming gently and two cups that seemed to shimmer faintly, as though resisting focus, as if they had been borrowed from a dream. Emiliano took his seat, and the innkeeper poured the tea, a pale golden liquid that smelled faintly of citrus and something older, perhaps amber, perhaps memory. "There are rooms in this house," she said, her eyes fixed not on him but on the steam rising from her cup, "that do not open until the right guest arrives. They are not locked. They are simply asleep." He listened, hands wrapped around the warm porcelain, though he had not yet taken a sip. "This room," she continued, "is one of them. It wakes for those who are ready to remember not just what happened, but what could have happened, and what did not." Emiliano's heart beat once, slowly, heavily, as though considering whether to proceed. "Tell me," she said, now looking directly into him, "do you recall a moment, a single evening, perhaps, not grand, not tragic, but quietly lost? Something that slipped between the folds of time and never quite returned?" He did not answer with words. He did not need to. His eyes had already begun to cloud, and a faint tremor danced along the rim of his cup. "Yes," she said softly. "That is the one." "What is this place?" he asked, finally, his voice rough with emotion held too long in stillness. "This is the Inn of Lost Hours," she replied, not as an explanation, but as a confirmation. "And its purpose is not to change the past, for that is not within its power, nor would it be wise. Its gift is gentler, quieter. Here, those who have lived too long with unanswered echoes may spend a single evening again, not as it was, nor as they wished it to be, but as it wished to be remembered." He felt something shift inside him, a door opening, a curtain parting, and in the space behind it, a flicker, no more than that, of candlelight reflected in a pair of eyes, a park bench in spring, the taste of wine half forgotten, the weight of silence beside someone no longer there. "Tonight," she said, pouring more tea, though neither of them had yet sipped, "you may choose. But first, the house will show you what you need to see." The rest of the day passed in a gentle blur, as though the hours themselves were treading softly, so as not to disturb the threshold Emiliano now stood upon. He wandered, yes, but the wandering was no longer aimless, each step led him not away, but deeper. Deeper into the folds of the inn, whose corridors now seemed longer, whose staircases twisted like streams through memory. He opened doors that led not to rooms, but to scenes, a lamplit alley where the air smelled of violets, a study lined with musical scores never played, a nursery where a mobile turned slowly above a crib empty of anything but light. In one room, he found a piano with a single key missing, and when he pressed the keys, they did not sound in notes, but in voices, laughter, gasps, the hush of someone saying a name too tenderly to repeat. In another, a mirror showed not his face, but his hands, young, unscarred, shaking slightly as they held a letter that had never been sent. Each room was an hour, perhaps less, or perhaps more, held in suspension, not lived again, but revisited, like the scent of perfume from a stranger's coat that reminds you of someone long gone. By the time twilight fell, softly, gently, like dust upon old wood, Emiliano found himself back in the central hall, where the clocks now ticked with a new rhythm, as if they had synchronized themselves to his pulse. The innkeeper met him there, a book in her hands. "This," she said, placing it in his palms, "is your ledger. It will open to the hour you are meant to recall. When you are ready, return to the room behind the mirror." "What will I find there?" he asked, though he was no longer certain he wished to know. "Yourself," she said. "But not as you are. As you once were, and as you might have been, if only." She did not finish. She did not need to. Emiliano returned to his room. The book was heavy, though not in weight, its pages thick with the hush of memories too long unspoken. He opened it with reverence, and as he turned the pages, images emerged, not drawn, not printed, but suggested, like shadows cast by candlelight on silk. A bicycle, red with rust. A station platform soaked in rain. A woman standing beside a lamppost, her coat too thin for the cold, her eyes waiting. He stopped. There she was. He did not know her name, but his soul did. The page curled slightly in the lamp's warmth, and the scent of cinnamon rose from it, though he could not say why. The room behind the mirror was now unlocked. He stepped through it, not boldly, not fearfully, but with the quiet solemnity of someone entering a chapel built not of stone, but of hours. Inside was a room he recognized. A bench beneath a willow tree. A bottle of wine half drunk. The evening air, still with the breath of spring. And footsteps. Coming closer. The hour had begun. There are moments in a life, so elusive, so delicately poised between what was and what might have been, that they do not disappear entirely, Nor do they remain fully present, but instead choose to dwell in a hidden recess of memory, where time is not measured in ticks or turns, but in sighs too deep to voice and glances that once trembled on the verge of being exchanged. And it was precisely within one such moment that Emiliano now found himself submerged, not by choice exactly, but by a calling. That came not from without, but from a place so deeply buried within that it might have been mistaken for silence itself. The air in the room that received him, not a chamber built of stone or plaster, but a recollection materialized, shaped by longing and outlined in that strange light that belongs neither to day nor to night, but to the sacred interstice between the two. Carried the fragrance of rain that had not yet fallen, mingled with the tender bitterness of leaves crushed underfoot in the hush of early spring, a scent that had no name, and yet awakened a cascade of images so precise, so unmistakably his, that Emiliano was overcome not with nostalgia, but with the aching clarity of something never properly lived, now offered back to him like a candle relit after years of darkness. Before him stood the willow tree, not a willow like others he had seen, but one draped in time itself, its long branches not merely bowing toward the ground, but brushing against the fabric of memory, weaving the air into trembling curtains of green that shimmered softly, as though each leaf remembered the wind that once touched it, and each shadow it cast bore the shape of a word that had been thought but never spoken. There was the bench, not painted, not polished, but worn in the manner of places where many have waited, its wood bearing the softened impressions of two bodies that had once sat side by side in a silence that spoke more than conversation ever could, and beside it, resting with an absent-mindedness so human it struck him as unbearably tender, lay the bottle of wine, its glass dark and beaded with droplets that glistened like tears upon the cheek of time. Emiliano did not move at once, for it seemed to him that even a breath, if taken too hurriedly, might dissolve the fragile perfection of the moment now reweaving itself around him, but slowly, reverently, he approached, each footstep muffled not by the ground, but by the vast quietude that enveloped all things here, a quietude that did not demand silence, but understood it, embraced it, and made of it a language all its own. And then, so softly it could have been imagined, yet so precisely placed that it struck his soul with the weight of recognition, came the sound of footsteps approaching from the other side of the willow, light and hesitant, as though the one who made them, too, were uncertain whether she was stepping into memory or into dream, and when she emerged at last from behind the veil of cascading branches, Emiliano's breath caught, not because he had forgotten her, but because he had remembered her too well. She was not beautiful in the way that poets often describe, for hers was not the beauty of symmetry or flawlessness, but of familiarity made sacred by absence, of a face remembered not for what it was, but for how it had once turned toward him in a moment too brief to hold, and now, in this hour suspended beyond clocks and consequence, she stood before him as she had never truly stood, present, unguarded, waiting. Emiliano, she said, and though he did not know her name, though no word had passed between them since this memory had first been born, he knew, with the certainty of the heart that precedes all thought, that she had once looked at him like this, not in this place perhaps, nor in this time, but with this gaze, steady and trembling, like a candle burning at the edge of wind. "You came," he whispered, though the phrase felt absurd, as though he had been the one awaited, and not the one who had come seeking. "I wasn't sure if you would remember," she replied, and her voice, though it seemed soft, held within it echoes of laughter never shared, of conversations that had dissolved into polite goodbyes instead of lingering, and above all, of a question that had been almost asked, but never dared. They sat upon the bench, and though no glass was poured, and no cork pulled from the bottle's neck, the scent of red wine blossomed in the air around them, rich and warm, as though the mere act of sitting had uncorked something older and more precious than any vintage. "Do you remember this evening?" she asked, not accusingly, not even sadly, but with the gentle curiosity of someone turning the pages of an old diary to find a pressed flower still clinging to scent. I remember a night that almost was, Emiliano replied, his eyes fixed not on hers, but on the slow sway of a branch above them, which seemed to echo the rhythm of a breath held too long. We walked, I think, along the embankment. The lights on the river had just begun to shimmer. You wore that same coat, though it was colder than you'd expected. And you offered me yours, she added, a half-smile curling at the edge of her lips like the shadow of something once begun. But I refused, and you didn't insist. No, he admitted, I didn't. The pause that followed was not empty, but filled with the weight of all that had never been said, with the memory of the space between their shoulders as they had walked side by side, so close that the brush of her sleeve might have passed for accident, and yet so careful, so maddeningly careful, that even the warmth of her nearness had felt like an ache rather than a comfort. I wonder, she said, after a while, what might have happened if you had taken my hand. So do I, he said, and there was nothing bitter in his voice, only the quiet sorrow of someone revisiting a corridor he once passed in haste, now walking it slowly, touching the walls as though to greet what he had once overlooked. They did not look at one another as they spoke, for it seemed that eye contact might snap the delicate thread upon which the hour now balanced, but instead kept their gazes fixed upon the leaves, upon the slow fall of a single blossom, upon the curve of the wine bottle resting like an ellipsis upon the grass. And yet, in that shared not looking, a closeness was born, not of bodies, not even of shared memory, but of forgiveness, offered not with words, but with presence, with the willingness to return together into a space long abandoned by time. Why didn't we, she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. Why didn't we try? Emiliano did not answer at once, for he felt the question rise within him like mist, curling around old fears, old hesitations, until at last, with an effort that felt both like breaking and healing, he replied, because I was afraid that what I felt was too fragile to bear the weight of reality. Because I thought silence would be kinder than rejection. Because I convinced myself that there would be another time. Her nod was not one of agreement, but of understanding, and for a moment, they said nothing more, allowing the hour to fill itself with what no speech could hold. When she spoke again, it was with a softness that seemed to come from another world, not far, but distant in the way a remembered song can be. You know this isn't real. I know, he said. But it's truer than anything I've had since. And with that, a change came, not sudden, not jarring, but as gentle as twilight giving way to dusk, as inevitable as the tide, and the willow leaves began to shimmer with a pale light, not of the moon, but of memory letting go, and Emiliano felt the edges of the moment begin to blur, as though the hour, having been honored, was preparing to fold itself back into the tapestry of forgotten things, this time not hidden, but held. She turned to him then, fully, her eyes luminous with all the words they had not spoken. Thank you, she whispered. For remembering. And though he longed to say her name, he found that he did not need to. The silence between them had spoken it more clearly than his voice ever could. The air grew still. The wine, untouched, vanished like mist. The willow closed its branches. The bench was empty. And Emiliano, standing alone once more in the room that was not a room but a moment reclaimed, felt no grief, only the profound peace that follows when something long buried is at last brought to light, not to be changed, but to be seen, to be known, and to be laid gently down. It was not with the rudeness of awakening, nor with the abruptness of interruption, that Emiliano emerged from that hour suspended like a pearl in the tide of time, but rather with the soft disquiet of one who, returning from a dream, is unsure whether the world he steps back into is the one he left or a mirror of it, subtly altered, distorted perhaps not in image but in essence. And as he stood once more within the room of the Lacanda, the true Lacanda, if indeed any part of it could claim such a title, He felt the stillness of its air, the hush of its wooden bones, envelop him with the tenderness not of a mother nor of a lover, but of an ancient, knowing presence that had seen many such returns and would see many more, never questioning, never judging, only receiving. His legs, though steady, bore the heaviness of those who have walked far within themselves, and his hands, hanging at his sides, seemed tinged with an invisible dust, the kind that clings not to skin but to memory. And when he opened the door through which he had first entered the chamber of his forgotten hour, he found not the hallway he recalled, nor the staircase, nor even the faint murmur of distant guests, but a corridor lit by lamps that seemed to sway in the stillness, as though stirred by a wind that moved through no visible space, a wind composed not of air, but of breath long held and at last released. He stepped forward, not guided by any voice, not summoned by any visible sign, but drawn by a pull older than desire, deeper than curiosity, a call that sang not in words but in resonances, subtle and unmistakable, like the echo of one's own name spoken in a language forgotten before birth. And with each step, the floor beneath him creaked not with the protest of age but with the sigh of wood remembering the weight of countless feet, and the walls, lined with frames whose contents shimmered as if painted in dew, seemed to lean ever so slightly inward, as though they, too, were listening. To what, he did not know. And yet he listened as well. Past a door half opened upon a room of ticking clocks, none alike, none in rhythm, each marking its own strange time in discordant harmony, their hands moving not in measured unity but in solitary dance, as though each tick were a solitary question posed to eternity, past a velvet curtain drawn aside to reveal a spiral staircase that ascended into a shaft of shadow shot through with glimmers of golden dust, each mote suspended like a thought unspoken, past a long, arched window behind which the stars did not remain fixed but drifted slowly, deliberately, like lanterns upon a great black river whose current obeyed no law known to men. And at length, he reached a door unlike the others. Not grand, not mysterious, but carved in plain wood, its surface worn by touch rather than time, its brass knob dulled by use, and above it, inscribed not in ink nor paint, but in the delicate bruising of the wood itself, as though pressed by centuries of silent mouths, were the words, "The cellar of what remains." He paused. Not out of fear, for fear was a thing of sharpness, of edges, and what he felt now was rounder, deeper, a solemnity, perhaps, a hush that pressed gently against his chest as though inviting him not merely to enter but to accept, and when he placed his hand upon the knob, the door did not resist him but opened inward with the quiet grace of something long awaiting its purpose. The descent was slow. Each step a breath. Each breath a letting go. The walls of the stairwell were lined not with stone nor wood but with mirrors of varying shapes and sizes, though none clear, for the glass of each was clouded, veiled with a mist that shifted as he passed, revealing not his face, but fragments, an eye brimming with unshed tears, a hand frozen before a gesture undone, a key dropped and never picked up, a room lit but never entered, and though he could not see himself in full, he recognized each shard not as something lost, but as something he had refused to carry. The cellar, when at last he reached it, did not resemble a place beneath the earth, for no dampness clung to its air, no mold bloomed in its corners. It was vast, and the ceiling was lost in dimness, and scattered throughout, in no apparent order, stood shelves, tables, chests, and alcoves, each containing items so ordinary they were sacred. A broken shoe, a child's drawing, a button sewn in haste, a teacup chipped on one edge, a book with its spine cracked open to a passage that had once mattered, though its words were now indecipherable, as though written in the alphabet of feeling. He wandered, not aimlessly, but as one who knows he is not to find, but to be found. And then, he came upon it. A table, small and square, upon which sat a journal bound in worn leather, a glass jar containing a single match, and beside it, a candle, unlit. He sat. The chair welcomed him not as furniture, but as witness. He opened the journal. The pages were blank. Or rather, they were not written in ink, but in presence, for as he turned each one, he felt, rather than read, the echoes of hours forgotten not because they lacked importance, but because they had been too quiet to survive the noise of life. A morning when he had watched dust spin in sunlight and wondered what it meant to age. An afternoon when he had stood at a crossroads and chosen the road not by desire, but by duty. An evening when he had almost spoken a truth, but let it fall back into the silence of propriety. And as he reached the last page, he found there a line, not written, not etched, but revealed, as though the page itself had exhaled its secret. There is no such thing as time wasted. Only time unopened. The candle flickered, though it had not been lit. And the match, still in its jar, grew warm. He reached for it. Struck it. Flame bloomed like memory. The candle caught. And in its glow, the cellar changed, not in shape, not in sound, but in feeling, as though it had recognized his recognition, as though it, too, had been waiting not for discovery, but for acknowledgement. He sat in the warm hush. And he wept. Not from sorrow, not from regret, but from the strange and terrible beauty of being permitted, even for a moment, to hold what had been forgotten, not to change it, not to correct it, but to witness it fully, to cradle it in understanding. Then, a voice, not loud, not startling, but woven into the very light of the flame, spoke. You have seen what lies behind you, Emiliano. Now you may choose what lies ahead. He looked up. But no figure stood before him. The voice, he realized, was not other, but inner, rising from the deepest part of himself, the part long silenced by survival, now given form by this place, this hour, this reckoning. And he understood. The Lacanda was not a place where one changed the past. It was a place where the past changed the present. Not by force, but by clarity. Not by magic, but by attention. He rose. The journal, though blank, felt full. The candle, though flickering, still burned. And the cellar, though silent, now thrummed with a kind of music only the soul could hear. He climbed the stairs again. The mirrors did not reflect. They remembered. And when he stepped back into the hallway, he found that the air had shifted, not in temperature, not in scent, but in resonance, as though something previously closed had now opened, and the walls, though unchanged, breathed with him. At the far end of the corridor stood the innkeeper. Her eyes met his. No words were spoken. None were needed. He nodded. She inclined her head. And together, in that corridor lined with hours once lost, now gently returned, they stood a moment longer before turning toward the door that led not outward, but onward. And so it was, under a sky neither of dawn nor dusk but of that delicate hue which only exists in the interstice between night and morning, when the stars have not yet relinquished their vigil, and the sun, still reticent in its rising, sends forth only the palest whisper of its coming, that Emiliano found himself once more at the threshold of the Lacanda, the great oaken door half open behind him, not as a dismissal nor a farewell, but as an invitation eternally extended to any who might, like him, stumble upon its presence without ever quite knowing whether it had been sought or summoned. The wind, that ancient courier of forgotten things, passed gently across his face, carrying not chill nor warmth but that peculiar softness that belongs solely to places which exist more in memory than in geography, and as he stepped forward, each movement no longer burdened by the invisible weights of regret and longing, but lightened by the strange serenity of having finally listened to the silence within, He felt not like one departing a place, but like one who has gathered the scattered leaves of himself and sewn them, leaf by leaf, into a cloak of quiet understanding. The gravel path that had once crackled underfoot with the weariness of a traveler unsure of his destination now yielded a softer sound, as though recognizing in him not a stranger, but a returned son. The gate, which before had groaned open as if reluctant to disturb its rusted rest, now swung wide with a gentleness that bordered on reverence, and the garden through which he passed, though unchanged in its unruly arrangement of wild roses, nodding thistles, and silver-leafed hedges, seemed somehow more alive, not in the flamboyant manner of blooming things, but in the secret way of places that have witnessed truth without needing to comment upon it. Beyond the garden wall, the world resumed, quietly, unassumingly, and without fanfare, for the village that surrounded the locanda, though never drawn on any map nor mentioned in any ledger, continued to breathe its cyclical life. The baker's chimney exhaled a curling strand of smoke scented with cinnamon and patience. The crooked steeple cast its bent shadow across the cobbled square like a sundial that measured only stories. The pigeons, fat and philosophical, cooed their endless opinions upon the rusted balconies, while the well in the center murmured to itself in that language only water knows, never the same twice and never truly understood. Yet to Emiliano, everything, each brick, each echo, each scent, felt both new and old, as if he were walking not into a world left behind but into one reborn, not changed in form but revealed in essence. He passed the apothecary's window, where jars of unknown contents glimmered like bottled fragments of the past, the tailor's shop, its door ajar, revealing a single coat on a mannequin, half-sewn and waiting as though time itself had paused mid-stitch, the bookshop, whose titles bore no names but glowed faintly with a light that came not from lamp nor lantern but from the pages themselves, eager to be opened, and more eager still to be understood. No one greeted him. And yet, everyone did. In the flicker of curtains drawn back for a heartbeat and then let fall. In the cat who slinked between his steps and paused only to offer a gaze deep as a question never asked. In the laughter of a child around a corner, fleeting and familiar, like the echo of joy one once held but forgot to hold tight enough. And through all this gentle resuming, Emiliano walked not with haste, for haste is the child of urgency and he had been delivered from urgency by the flame of that candle in the cellar, but with the measured grace of one who has nothing more to chase and nothing more to flee, only steps to take, one after the other, each one a quiet declaration. I was there. I remember. I go forward. When at last he reached the crest of the hill overlooking the locanda, he turned. It stood as it always had, or always might, its roof stitched with moss and moonlight, its windows flickering with lights not sourced from fire nor filament, but from dreams, some ending, some just beginning, and though no face peered from within, no hand lifted in parting, he felt the innkeeper's presence, her stillness, her knowledge, her waiting. And he bowed, not out of courtesy, but out of reverence. Not for her alone, but for the journey. For the hour he had recovered. For the hours still hidden. For the ones who would come. And for those who never would. Then he turned once more, and descended into the valley, where the river ran slow and wide, and the reeds bent not from wind but from the weight of listening, and as he followed the old road, its path uncertain, its destination irrelevant, he felt the locanda behind him, not as something left, but as something carried, folded carefully into the quietest pocket of his soul, where it would remain, not as a memory, but as a room he could visit in sleep, in solitude, or in the moment just before. Speaking a truth long held. Time passed. Not as it does on clocks, but as it does in lives. Seasons turned. The sea, that old accomplice of endings, retreated and returned. Emiliano grew older, though never with the bitterness of one surprised by age. but with the calm of one who had once spoken with time and been forgiven. He moved through cities and towns, spoke with those who listened and those who didn't, loved quietly, lost gently, and planted seeds he would never see bloom, not because he believed in some reward, but because he knew that even forgotten hours feed the roots of what matters. And sometimes, only sometimes, on evenings where the fog hung low and the wind carried the perfume of distant things, he would feel the pull of something ancient and tender, and he would close his eyes, and the world would hush, and he would remember the door that had no name, the match that sparked memory, the cellar lined with silence. And he would smile. And keep walking. For the Lacanda did not need to be found again. It had never truly been left. Its rooms, its mirrors, its ticking clocks, its whispered truths, they lived within him now, not as a burden, but as a light. A single candle. Still burning. Still warm. Still waiting. And so ends the tale of Emiliano, traveler of the Inn of Lost Hours, who came with questions and left with none, who searched for something forgotten and found instead the grace of remembering. May you, dear dreamer who reads now in the hush of approaching sleep, find in your own wandering such an inn, not built of brick or beam, but of breath and recollection, and may your lost hours, like his, return not to haunt, but to hold. Gently. Always gently. Like the hush before dawn. Like the hush that never ends.